Welcome to our Just Talk, Talk Just panel discussion. Critical Race Theory meets the Bible and Theology. Sponsored by Union Presbyterian Seminary's Center for Social Justice and Reconciliation and the Katie Geneva Cannon Center for Womanist Leadership. The conversation taking place today is similar to the dialogue that happens in our academic classrooms. Union would love to be in touch with you about opportunities to further your theological education. Please contact our admissions office at admissions@upsem.edu. Are you interested in exploring topics in womanist religious thought? The Katie Geneva Cannon Center for Womanist Leadership and the Leadership Institute at Union Presbyterian Seminary hosts its next intensive course this January entitled Proto-Womanist Thought, Engaging Leading Black Women Thinkers and Rhetoricians. Visit centerforwomanistleadership.org to sign up today. Our panelists are Dr. Andre E. Johnson, Associate Professor and Scholar in Residence at the Benjamin L. Hooks Institute for Social Change at the University of Memphis. He teaches classes in African American Public Address, Rhetoric, Race and Religion, Media Studies, Interracial Communication, Rhetoric of Social Movements, and Hip-Hop Studies. Dr. Johnson is the author of No Future in This Country, The Prophetic Pessimism of Bishop Henry McNeil Turner. He is also the curator and director of the Henry McNeil Turner Project, a digital archive dedicated to the writings and study of Bishop Turner. Geeta N. Kapoor, the lead lawyer for the Moral Monday protests in North Carolina and a critical race theory scholar. A native of Kenya, she's also an alumna of the UNC Chapel Hill Law School and the author of the book about UNC, To Drink from the Well, The Struggle for Racial Equality at the nation's oldest public university. And Dr. Teresa L. Smallwood, Associate Director of the Public Theology and Racial Justice Collaborative and a postdoctoral fellow at Vanderbilt University. Born in Windsor, North Carolina, she attended UNC Chapel Hill, majoring in speech communications and Afro-American studies, then received the Juris Doctor degree from North Carolina Central University School of Law. Following a several-decade career in law, she graduated with a PhD from Chicago Theological Seminary in the area of theology, ethics, and human sciences. Our host and moderator is Dr. Rodney Sadler, Associate Professor of Bible and Director of the Center for Social Justice and Reconciliation. Dr. Sadler, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much, Mike. It's wonderful again to be joining everyone for another Just Talk, Talk Just, as we begin to wrestle with this issue, this concept that seems to have taken the world by storm, the notion of critical race theory. I want to welcome you on behalf of the Center for Social Justice and Reconciliation and the Katie Geneva Cannon Center for Womanist Leadership to yet another one of our installations. These conversations began in the aftermath of the George Floyd uprising, when we thought we needed to have a theological voice wrestling with issues of race in America, trying to find the way forward for us as church, as community, as people of faith. We're glad that you're joining us this evening, and we know that this might be a fascinating, but also a fraught conversation. So we want you all to join us tonight with open minds and open hearts so that we're ready to engage this significant topic that's shaping discourse in the public square. Frankly, I have to tell you, I can't understand why nearly a 50-year-old idea, critical race theory, has recently become the source of such vitriol in the public square. Why has this simple three-word phrase been the subject of such venom in the American public square? Why are state legislators trying to outlaw proponents of this field from even mentioning this phrase in classrooms? How is such an aberrant notion as the rejection of a law school course theme been normalized across state lines and across our country at this time? Does this have the markings of a conspiracy? I cannot be sure, but I want to suggest that it might be for a few reasons. Perhaps because critical race theory is presenting the ugly truth about the reality of our nation, the truth that those vaunted ideals that we espouse with regularity, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal. Well, they've never really been true, and rarely have they been the subject of our country's striving. I think critical race theory might point this out. Perhaps it's because it exposes the fact that the United States has never been a meritocracy that we have claimed it to be. That some of those who have not worked as hard as others have succeeded, in part because of the lightness of their hue, while others who have worked tirelessly found themselves unemployed, incarcerated, impoverished, bankrupt, humiliated because of the darkness of their color. I think critical race theory probably points this out as well. Perhaps it's because it forces many to have to confront the fact that they have had undue privilege in our society, and further, that this privilege came at the expense of many others, forced to suffer so that they could thrive. The genocide, slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, internment, war on drugs, mass incarceration, segregation, and a host of other race-based policies have had a real impact on the distribution of wealth, power, and privilege in our nation. I think critical race theory just might point this out as well. Actually, this is a difficult subject to wrestle with, and I don't know all of the answers to this. We don't know all the answers, but we have some great experts tonight that might help us to wrestle with these concerns. I want to start off by asking law professor and attorney Gita Kapoor the basic question that is on all of our minds. What is critical race theory? What is its history? How did it begin? And was its background in the legal profession?
Thank you, Reverend Sadler, for having me tonight. I'm delighted to be with you all. Critical race theory is an academic concept that was created by progressive law professors in the 1980s. Law schools teach that the law is objective and neutral. They also teach that the law is colorblind and that legal institutions employ a rational and apolitical method in distributing power, and that American institutions are racially and culturally neutral. However, the law has been used throughout American history as the primary tool to uphold white supremacy and white domination and establish hierarchies of gender, class, and sexual orientation. Let me give you a few examples. Slavery was an institution that was protected and upheld by the law. Jim Crow segregation, the era of American apartheid, was enshrined in law. Voter restriction laws, as they suggest, were laws upheld by the legal system, and criminal justice policy decisions made in the war on drugs led to mass incarceration of Black and brown people. American history also shows that oppressed and marginalized groups have never passively accepted their treatment. They've resisted. And critical race theory is a part of that long tradition of resistance, again, by progressive law professors. It confronts the myth that America is a society based upon meritocracy. Dr. King put it this way: it's the myth of meritocracy is that one can pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But the truth is, as he said, many people aren't wearing boots. So critical race theory is a legal analysis that identifies and critiques the causes of inequalities. If America is a meritocracy, Why are jobs, wealth, education, and power distributed by race, and distributed in such a manner where white Americans have most of the power and Black and brown people have very little power? The tenets of critical race theory, I don't have time to go into all of them, but I would like just to familiarize everyone with two tenets so that we all can have a conversation about what critical race theory is and what it is not. Critical race theory says that race is not a biological classification. Race cannot be proven by science. Race was invented, and it is a social construct that has been used over time to uphold white supremacy and to promote racism. So that's the first tenet. Race is not a biological construct. There's many science journals to support that. The second is that racism is not just individual bias or prejudice, but is something that is embedded in laws, regulations, rules, procedures, and institutions that lead to different outcomes by race. And so, in effect, this second tenet of critical race theory is that, if I had to simplify it, I would say this: racism can exist without racist people. Racism is enshrined in the law. Let me just point out one other thing, if I may, Dr. Sadler. What we have seen recently is that our former president, Donald Trump, and conservatives stole the term critical race theory, have lied about what it truly is, and have used it as a weapon and deployed it to rally conservative voters, to the midterm elections. So critical race theory is not what we have heard it to be recently in the media and in our conversations with the people in our lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that answer. You've lifted my understanding a good deal. So race is not real, but the implications of racism are strengthened by laws and have been strengthened over history of our nation by laws that enforced racist policies. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. And critical race theory is scholarship that interrogates the role that the law has played in promoting race, promoting racism, and promoting white supremacy.
Thank you. So it sounds as though critical race theory is a rejoinder to an unjust status quo. And it's this rejoinder that seems to be under attack in the public square.
Well, I think the concept of critical race theory that is attacked in the public square right now is not really critical race theory. It's a catch-all phrase. If we look at history, whenever this nation has been prepared to deal with the issue of race in an effort to make racial progress, conservatives invent a crisis, give it a title that the common American person can understand. Let me give you an example. After the monumental ruling in Brown versus Board of Education, the Supreme Court said that separate but equal was a fallacy and that segregation is inherently unequal and unconstitutional. In its wake, there was an outcry by conservatives for neighborhood schools.
Yes.
So in the moment of racial reckoning, where this nation was ready to reckon with race, and reckon with racism. This was after we all had to watch George Floyd being suffocated to death on TV. Once this nation was forced into that moment, it's then that Donald Trump and the conservatives start talking about critical race theory in an effort to end the 1619 Project curriculum from being implemented in public schools. So again, the critical race theory that people are using is being misused, and it's very frustrating to scholars like myself who've spent a long time studying it. One of my law school professors, John Calmore, who's no longer with us, was one of the founders, and he is probably rolling over in his grave right now at how this term that was so near and dear to him and many other progressive scholars in the legal profession is being misused and lied about and deployed as a political tool. So I would say that we not even use critical race theory, that we use American history. That's what they really don't want to be taught, is American history, the complete, full, total American history.
Amen. Thank you so much for that. A true American history is what's being decried, and it's being labeled as critical race theory in order to give a particular party, a particular group within our society. And I don't even want to say that. I don't think this is something that conservatives came up with. I think this is a tool that's been used to manipulate conservatives to get a result at the polls. We'll come back to that later on. I think conservatives often feel put on. Many conservatives recognize that critical race theory is not the enemy that those leaders who've manipulated this have said it to be. Thank you so much, Attorney Kapoor. I want to turn my attention right now to Attorney Dr. Teresa Smallwood. You live in both worlds. As I begin to question you, I wonder how theological education, how does it benefit from the insights raised by critical race theory? And is there a similar kind of theory within theological education that mimics or does a similar thing to that which critical race theory does?
Thank you so much for, first of all, for having me. And then thank you also for having Ms. Kapoor give us that obviously very, very well thought out introduction, because it is helpful to me as well. Because I don't practice anymore, it's very, very important for us to understand the difference between a legal theory or a theory that has been used over the years to aid legal practitioners versus those others of us who, through interdisciplinarity, have the need to draw from a whole lot of frames of reference. And so in leading into this idea of something being stolen, I'm happy to say to you that her framing helps me so much, because so much of our very faith has been stolen. And the reality is, when she talks about something stolen in terms of critical race theory, what we have is what Charles Long, the great historian of religions, would call a signifier. So really, the formality of a CRT has been stolen for the purpose of using it as a signifier. And what Charles Long says is that significations or signifiers are just like liars. And that's exactly what we have, is the same handle that is being used to establish an uptick of white nationalist supremacy. We saw the same thing happen at the decision of Brown versus Board. Once that happened, you saw Prince Edward County shut down, get out of the business of education for several years, because they wanted to deploy this particular decision as a weapon. And so when I think about theological education, there is a parallel. And what we see in many, many instances is how it is that Black theologians particularly, but people in general, particularly liberation theology, have had to work with the need to help people understand the ideologies and break away from them. The first thing that comes to mind is William R. Jones's piece on whether God is a white racist. This need to deconstruct and understand whose narrative is in your mouth. Are you actually talking about the God of liberation, the God who works with those who are oppressed, or are you speaking of someone who only plays to the 1% and makes them the blessed, and the rest of us take the rest? I could name 100 books, but I'm very, very drawn to people like Richard Hughes, who has, through his theological take, looked at the myths that America lives by. I'm also drawn by Kelly Brown Douglas's work on the Black Christ. You know, we can think in terms of how Jacqueline Grant situated the difference between feminist appreciation of Jesus, because that was the white Christ, versus womanist situatedness of Jesus as our Black or our Jesus. This notion then that within our own ideological consumptions of theology, we have a responsibility to talk about people's lived experience, to talk about what it is that the Bible itself has been used for. And in the same way as Ms. Kapoor talked about deploying something as a weapon, the very Bible has been deployed as a weapon. We talk in terms of, for instance, the many passages that were used to keep people in enslavement. Slaves, obey your masters. We could talk about Howard Thurman's grandmother, who wouldn't read certain passages because of how they were deployed. And most definitely, we can talk in terms of how it is that many scholars had to go and look at how stony the road was. Kane Hope Felder's work, how we could blacken the Bible, Michael Brown's work. We can think in terms of all of the ways in which people like Melissa Harris Perry talks about the sister citizen. This notion then that we have to really comprise a new understanding. And obviously we get to James Hal Cone's work, you know, The Cross and the Lynching Tree, and so many others that he did. So yes, we have a parallel system that we analyze and think about these ideologies. And they are in fact racist ideologies. But what we also have to acknowledge in the same vein is the fact that our people didn't stay under that bush harbor or that hush harbor for the whole time. We gained some interest around our own theological consumptions and constructions through our capacity to relate both to African cosmologies, to our own experiential, and most definitely to our own relationality with a God who cares about those who have been pushed aside. And so, you know, we can think in terms of our own capacity to really transcend. Mm-hmm. And that then becomes a very important aspect of our theological ways of deconstructing the many, many ways in which those racist ideologies sought to keep us intact. I'll stop it there.
Well, thank you for this. And as I listen to your response, one of the things that stands out to me is this almost sounds as though the attack on critical race theory would be similar to an attack on Black liberation theology or an attack on African-American biblical hermeneutics as being a racist endeavor, instead of it being a rejoinder to a racist system that's trying to provide a corrective historiography.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
yeah,
I totally agree.
Interesting. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate your response in this regard. Dr. Johnson, you are a person who studies rhetoric and the way that we speak in the public square, and the way that we talk, our discourse when we engage. How has the idea of critical race theory been used to poison the well of American politics, not just against critical race theory itself, but against the true American history?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me to be a part of this wonderful panel and associate myself with these wonderful people. The doors of the church are already open. Let me just extend the invitation right there. I mean, I think our first two panelists did a wonderful job of unpacking what critical race, what this masking, if I should say, of critical race theory is all about. Well, how it's been used in politics. And this is where really the rubber really meets the road. So the questions that I have are moral questions, are ethical questions that I have about this critical race theory in the public arena. First of all, you got Christopher Rufo, for instance, who has already told everybody who would listen to him that when he began to start to use critical race theory as this weapon, as attorney, the first attorney talked about, Attorney Gita had talked about, as he begins to use this as a weapon, he knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to rile up the conservative base for, as you mentioned earlier, Brother Sadler, the midterm elections. So he already told us exactly what he was doing. He knew that critical race theory, well, first of all, he knew that many people did not even know what it meant. And if I could just keep saying, it's called repetition, if I can just keep saying critical race theory and then define it in the public arena and keep defining it and saying it over and over again and pointing to it as something bad. I may not know why it's bad, because you see these spots, right? You think that, and you know, progressives love to do this. What is critical race theory? And when a person can't answer it, then they say, see, you don't even know what it means. But they don't understand. They never knew what it meant, and it don't really matter. They just know that it is something bad. And that's exactly what they wanted to do. And then when white evangelical churches got a hold of it, then they began to not only say it's bad, but it's sinful, it's evil, it's demonic, it is not right, it is not American, it's against our Judeo-Christian heritage, it's against the Christian tradition, it's against the Bible. None of that is true. And that's the first issue I have with the propagation of critical race theory in the public arena, that most of what is being talked about is not true. And what we are trying to do is to have reason and rational conversations with people who are not coming to the table in good faith. They know they are lying. They know they're not telling the truth. So in the tradition, on the faith tradition, how do you respond? Well, the truth shall set them free. The truth. But when we try to talk truth, the truth then is used against us as, see, that's what we're talking about, and that's what we don't want. So you almost are in a catch-22 when you try to debate or when you try to have reason and an argument, then your reason arguments are used against you. That's first. Secondly, as far as conservatives are concerned, I think this is already out of the bag, and it will be a key issue in the midterm elections. It is a political topic now. It is on the agenda. Matter of fact, didn't Kevin McCarthy just say a week ago that they are going to announce when they come back in the new year that they are going to now nationalize this critical race theory? And if you read the some of the laws, like here in Tennessee and like in other states, what they talk about is critical race theory will not be taught in K-12 schools. And here's what we mean by critical race theory. They actually define it within the law itself, which leads one to, once you read it, leads you to believe and leads you to really say, wait a minute, I can't even make mention of some of the things that have happened in history, because I may be accused of teaching critical race theory. Now, everybody says, oh, that's too far-fetched. Well, in Tennessee, a person has already been fired from his job because he had students read Ta-Nehisi Coates' writing or reading, and all of a sudden he got in trouble because he was teaching, quote, critical race theory. Second, last piece, and this is the most egregious piece, I think, because part and parcel the reason why they are pushing critical race theory is because they don't, their argument, and this is what I listen to, the argument is, we do not want our children to feel bad about themselves. We do not want them to have any type of bad feelings or feel inferior. So you should not teach that there's anything inferior. And you're sitting here thinking, and the media helps out because they only go to, seem like they only go to certain parents to talk about this. But I am sure Black parents and other parents of color are looking around saying, oh my God, what are you talking about? The entire system is made to make us feel inferior, feel bad. And one of the reasons why critical race theory is developed in law school and Black liberation theology is developed in these theological schools, and cultural and critical studies, and the work that I do and the work that other scholars do to unearth and to point out ways so we can all come together and move forward. This is why that work had to be done in the first place. The reason why our Bishop Henry McNeil Turner had to, in 1895, say God is a Negro. Why? Because I am trying to get Black people to understand that you too are made in the image of God. 1895. And why James Cone and others, Albert Clegg and others, and Dolores Williams and others who are coming and talking about the same stuff to try to get people to understand that you too are valued, you too are made in the image of God. And all of a sudden, a reading or an understanding of what slavery really did, or what Reconstruction could have been versus what happened to it, all of a sudden it's going to make somebody feel bad? No. That's what is happening right now, and it's right there, and it seems like it is gaining momentum and gaining steam. And if we do not begin to understand that white evangelical churches had a role in this, and they helped shaped it, and they helped mold it, and they're propagating it, and they're promoting it from the pulpits. They're preaching about it, they're teaching about it, and people are now associating that with sin and sinfulness and demonic, and then everything that's bad and evil. Then we will never really get our hands around the public interpretation of critical race theory.
Thank you so much. What a rich answer, a rich response, Dr. Johnson. As I hear you, I'm hearing this notion that we don't want to offend our children.
We don't want to offend our white children.
And I was going to say that. I was going to exactly say that. I think that means white children
exactly
in our system, by telling the history of what's happened to Black mothers, fathers, and children with slavery, oppression, the commodification of human lives, the murder, rape, and butchery of Black human bodies. That's not offensive. What is offensive is telling our children about this today. That seems to be fundamentally problematic, I have to admit.
And that's exactly what the 1619 Project got into all of that brouhaha, if you will, was all about. And you're absolutely right. It is this unpacking of history. But that's where the healing can begin.
Yes.
Can happen. Once you know, you can, do better and be better and learn from the past.
Yes.
But if the past is not being articulated, then how are we going to move forward?
Amen. Thank you so much for that. There's a line that we use with our Reimagining America project. We have a truth reconciliation process that we've been working on with the Center of Social Justice and Reconciliation. And one of the things that we say is that no one alive today is guilty for establishing the system. So critical race theory or nothing else is trying to make people guilty for establishing the system, but everyone is responsible to do something about it.
Right.
I think if we could begin to help people understand that we're not trying to bring up critical race theory as, or no one's trying, I mean, the critical race theory isn't being used in schools, but the idea is to deal with the true history and let's begin to find a way to atone for the sins of the past. I want to lift up question number 1 that came in from one of our watchers, our viewers today. Mark Davis says, what practical ways do we need to amend or adjust church educational ministry to better educate or inform our members so that we can move to promote justice? Let me start with you, Dr. Smallwood, with that question. What does the church need to do to change the way it teaches so that we can move towards justice in these issues?
Well, I certainly thank him for that question. I have been a proponent of utilizing our church schools as a means to really tell our story. What we have here is an uptick of a number of different ways of attacking all of the gains we made in the civil rights movement. All right. So it's not just this idea of critical race theory. We're beginning to see these attacks on other ends as well. The educational piece, the piece around voting and voter suppression, and all of these things tie right back to the rights bills, to the ways in which King marched and sought to have us open the opportunities in America for jobs and freedom. And so we must tell our story in the frames and in the places where we have audience. And I would suggest starting with church school. It's not to say that we don't need to teach the Bible, but we need to teach it in context and with those biblical scholars who have written and can help to straighten the record. The other piece of this is, in my opinion, we need to utilize more of those who have already given their time to public systems, who are now retired and can do some after-school programs. And I'm here to say that a lot of us need to certainly start reading first, because the truth of the matter is there has been a whole lot written recently. Carol Anderson's work about white rage, Nancy McLean's work about democracy in chains, so that you get a clear picture that what we are working against here is not just the legal theories issues. We see an uptick in gentrification in our neighborhoods. Where does that come from? And the government is complicit in all of these things. And so our folks need to understand the history. We need to understand and very clearly paint the picture truthfully. But more particularly, we need to teach our folks our story. And it is imperative in my mind that we understand the importance of supporting our HBCUs, being in a posture where we are very clear on the fact that if the government chooses to pull the wool out from under us completely, because that's where we headed, that we have some fallback positions, the same as our ancestors did. I'm convinced at this point, Dr. Sadler, that people can use anything. You recall sometime back, Nixon made welfare queen become the handle. And as a result, so many of us have been characterized in a certain way. Jezebel has been a handle. There have been all kinds of ways in which the thinking has been to turn inside out the positions that we've taken to win rights. And so if that is the case, if we know that is the case, then we have to train folk. Now, we also need to acknowledge the fact that they are slick, they have resources, and there has been so much money put into telling the story about critical race theory in a fashion that distorts the record. So for instance, you can go on YouTube right now and Google Prager University. It is not a university at all. but they have established themselves as the spokespeople for what is social justice, what is critical race theory, and they tell the story succinctly. They use graphics that make people draw in, and we need to show these films to our folks and help them understand how this message is being distorted. So from a standpoint of education, utilize the tools that help us distinguish and to know very sincerely and to discern for ourselves what the truth really is. Because truth has now been put on trial. And truth needs credible witnesses to stand up for it and to speak truth, not only to power, but in power.
Amen. Thank you for such a, sounds like you should have written that down. That should be part of a book maybe your next book. You can have that as a beginning of a chapter there. Sounds wonderful. Attorney Kapoor, Dr. Douglas, do you have anything else to add to that?
I want to go back to some, if I may, Dr. Sadler,
Excuse me,
with your
Dr.
permission.
Johnson. Yes.
I would like to go back to something that Reverend Johnson just discussed.
Yes.
It's really important that we as Americans realize when we are being misled.
Yes.
Fox News has mentioned critical race theory 1,300 times from May until August of this year. 1,300 times. And May to August is a very key time period. That's a time period leading up to the election. Suddenly, new bills to ban critical race theory from being taught in public schools were introduced by Republican legislators across the country. As of August, 27 states have introduced bills or instituted other measures that restrict how teachers can discuss racism and sexism. So it's not that they don't want critical race theory being taught, because in my opinion, critical race theory can only be taught in a law school by a progressive professor, preferably someone of color who understands race and racism in a way that other people don't. What they really don't want is for racism and sexism to be torn down, because once that happens, the hierarchy, the system that has perpetuated white domination and white supremacy will fall. So, and I think people need to be aware that these proposed measures are not limited to the South. It's not just in the South that they are trying to restrict teachers on racism and sexism. Indeed, Iowa, the first place where we believed that President Barack Obama, well, he was senator then, could possibly be president because he carried the Iowa caucus in the primary, right? That was the moment where all of us had a something shifted in our hearts, in our spirits. We had hope. Iowa is one of the states that is intending to restrict how teachers teach, not just in K through 12. That's another thing I want people to understand. These bills do not just endeavor to control what is taught in kindergarten to 12th grade. They purport to restrict teachers in the public universities and the public colleges that are funded by the state. New Hampshire is another state. Maine is another state. New York is another state. And our own beloved state of North Carolina. If Governor Cooper had not vetoed the bill, North Carolina's bill would have banned my book on the racial history of the nation's oldest public university. My book would not be able to be taught. In effect, I have a vision of all my books being thrown in a pile and set on fire. So I would ask that we not talk about American history as a synonym for critical race theory. That's
Amen.
part of
Amen.
taking back the term that has been stolen from legal scholars like myself.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Johnson, and I apologize for calling you Dr. Douglas. I was thinking of Frederick Douglass when you last spoke.
Is it on me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. No, I just want to agree with what she just said. I mean, one of the things that that a lot of us get twisted by is what we call playing in the same sandbox as your opponents rhetorically. And so if you get into their game and you start talking about, well, this is American, no, you're lying. You're not being truthful. You know you're not being truthful. Most of the politicians know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly what they're doing. And if we do not begin to speak on this truthfully and forcefully and just keep same way they're hammer it the other way, we are going to be stuck here. And more people are going to be misled, and more people are going to be hurt in the long run, because I think, Dr. Smallwood, you're absolutely right, because this is just a part of the larger project of taking away and taking back the rights and privileges that many folk fought for, stood up for, and many people today celebrate. They celebrate that today. They applaud that today. But yet in real time, they are doing the same thing that their foreparents did when folks stood up to them, and when they were called names, and when they were looked at as being out of order or not following protocol. So we must continue to just speak the truth. And the truth is, America, and those memes that's going around on social media about that's not critical race theory, that's just American. We need to stop that. It's not. American history is American history. Critical race theory is something totally different.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think looking at some of the questions that are coming from the audience, David Hinman asks how do we combat people coming to the table that aren't coming in good faith? And I think that you've addressed that, Dr. Johnson, fairly well. Tom Bacon asked, since critical race theory is misunderstood, distorted, should we use different language, i.e. history? I think we've also begun to adjust this as well. But a question I might have is this. So what should we be teaching our children in K through 12 about race and our racial history? What should we be teaching our children? I want to start with you, Attorney Kapoor.
Well, my answer is very simple. We should be teaching the factual history of this nation. When I was in the public schools here in high school, in my history class, I think we may have spent 15 minutes of a class period talking about slavery. Then I found myself in a freshman seminar at UNC. My professor was an African-American woman. We spent an entire semester covering slavery, and I learned so much that I did not know before. The reason that they don't want this being taught at the K through 12 level is because it would form children who are different, who would have different viewpoints. It's too late, in my mind, for children to learn the real history of America and at university. That at that point, it's never too late, but at that point, we are already behind. So I think the real history of this nation needs to be taught in schools. And that's my answer.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Dr. Smallwood.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that not only should the books like what the attorney has written be available, but we need to help our folks understand the history from various vantage points. Howard Zinn's book opened my eyes a great deal about American history, because there was now a different frame for what happened to the Indians. I remember being in a play in my school at the 4th grade, and they were the enemy. So we need to straighten the record, no doubt. But I also feel, and it's very important for us to look at the slave narratives. We need to understand the life of Frederick Douglass, Linda, all of the people who have written. We need to understand our period times, you know, of lynching, Ida B. Wells. We need to understand the Jim Crow era. We need to understand very clearly, I think, Derek Bell's work, which didn't actually make it into the sort of foundational pieces. We need to know what W.E.B. Du Bois has said about two-ness, because that is a critical theory about race. It's not critical race theory, right? And we need to understand that we've been thinking critically about race a long time, because it's the construct that has kept us in a really a deconstructed way. Well, just as importantly, we need to know what they're saying about it, right? So there have been several manuscripts recently that have come up to really expose, and I just want to put these out there. The first one is called "The Bible Told Them So." It's how Southern evangelicals basically fought to preserve white supremacy. How Southern white evangelicals fought to preserve white supremacy. That's J. Russell Hawkins's piece. Then "Taking America Back for God," Andrew Whitehead and Samuel Perry. Then there is "Jesus and John Wayne," how white evangelicals basically robbed a faith, corrupted a faith, I think it says, and fractured a nation. And then there's the work of Robert Jones, "The End of White Christian America." What we really need to know is why this is happening. What's happening is happening because there is a concerted effort to try and dial us back, yes, to pre-Civil War days. But there's also a fright that somewhere along the line, about 25 years from now, they won't be in control. They won't have the demographics. And as a result, we need to put things in place. So this is why you saw the American Heritage Foundation spend $11 million to get Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court. Another $10 million to get Brett Kavanaugh there. And then all of the other pieces that fell into place to bring Amy onto the court. Because we know that if we lose control demographically, that we can control the branches of government, right? And then there is also a need, I think, when it comes right down to it, that we understand we also need to change some of our language. In the pulpits, a lot of us are still teaching white evangelical thinking. And if we don't change that, then the message will be missed on more than just white folks.
Praise God. We need to change what we're preaching from our platform. Thank you so much. Dr. Johnson, do you want to weigh in on this question? What should we be teaching? And I want to expand this. What should we be teaching in our schools, in our seminaries, and in our churches on Sunday? What should we be teaching?
One of the things that I like to do in my classes, in church, and anywhere I get an opportunity to teach is, and it's from the rhetorical tradition, we love to teach the controversy itself. Teaching the controversy means that you look at, both sides of this, and you read the arguments, and you look at them, and you begin to see, and you can see some of the students like, wait a minute, because they never one of the things, for instance, one of the things that is so remarkable is when a person all their life believed, for instance, that the Civil War was fought over, quote, states' rights or tariffs. And then you just give them the South Carolina's secession document. And you say, read this and write a reflection paper. Oh, yeah. And let's talk about that. What's going on here? Do you see anything? I mean, you see these rhetorical templates over and over. What's going on here? And then all of a sudden you begin to see this stuff. Well, you can do that in the church with not only biblical texts, but you can do that with other texts as well too, and talk about how these texts help shape the biblical text, but also how the biblical text helps shape the public policy that we have, because many of these politicians who are passing these laws are born again Christian folk who will claim Jesus as their Lord and Savior. And I keep hammering that in because I know we like to think that they're not real Christian. No, they believe that they are. And those books that Dr. Smallwood named, great books, and in those books they were claiming, yes, I am a believer and I am doing what God wants me to do, and that's what I'm going to do. And look at how what they done, what they did rather, and what they are doing is shaping, yes, overall policy and how it is affecting people. And last thing, also look at what people protest over. What do you get riled up about? What do you march in the streets about? What make you get fired up? And look at that, and then look at the arguments surrounding that. And then you begin to see the God that you serve.
Amen. Thank you so much. And Dr. Johnson, I'm sorry that I know that you are scheduled for another conversation that starts in 2 minutes, 3 minutes. But I don't know if you have any last statements before you want to go. I'd love to hear a closing statement from you.
I just want to thank all of you for putting this together. I want to thank the panelists. I want to thank all the people that are watching this on social media. Thank you for inviting me and having an opportunity to really talk about this. This is some of my future work, so I hope to be able to share more thoughts about this. But thank you again for this opportunity, and may you continue to do the work, and may you continue to be blessed by God to do this work that you're called to do. It's wonderful work. It's important work.
Amen. And thank you so much for being with us. And certainly, we will invite you to come back and share the results of that other research that you're doing right now. We'll be eager to have you come back and share with us.
And I'll be eager to come, and I will be able, hopefully, to stay the whole entire time and just have a good time.
Amen. 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 We look forward to that. Let me ask Attorney Kapoor, Attorney Dr. Smallwood, we seem to be in a nation that has a serious problem with the notion of truth. How did we get to where we are today? And how do we begin to move beyond it? We've talked about the fact that the attacks against critical race theory are not true attacks. How do we get back to the truth, and what do we need to do as a society in this critical moment? Dr. Kapoor.
I wish I was a doctor, but
you have a Juris Doctorate. You're a doctor, yes.
Well, you asked how we got to this moment of untruth. America has always been stuck in untruth.
Yes.
We believe that all men are created equal. That is not what they believed. They did not believe that the dark, brown-skinned African people that they were forcing to labor for them, that they were raping, were equal to them. We haven't gotten past that moment. So I would say America has been built on a lie and is stuck in the cycle of lying. It's like my mom taught me not to lie, because then you're going to have to say 40 other lies to cover up the lie. And that's what this critical race theory debate is all about. It's to cover up the first lie, that this nation was founded upon egalitarian principles, that this nation is a democracy, that this nation is a meritocracy where everybody can achieve the American dream. Those are all falsehoods. Now, what I would say, what I want to leave your viewers with is this. Clint Smith is a journalist for The Atlantic magazine. He recently said this: for some Americans, history is not the story of what actually happened. It's the story they want to believe. So we are at a defining moment in our nation. Do we want to know what actually happened? Or do we want to turn our heads and believe something else? And the other thing I would say is that please stop using critical race theory. Yes. Unless you are referring to it in a legal context. Otherwise, what we all need to say is American history. It's that simple. And for your readers, I would urge everyone, to get your hands on this book. It's called Critical Race Theory. These are the key documents that started the movement. Read for yourself what critical race theory is by the people who defined critical race theory in the 1980s, not just recently.
Yes.
And thank you so much. I've really enjoyed being with you today.
Thank you so much, Attorney Kapoor. Dr. Smallwood, truth. Where are we with truth? And what do we do in this time where truth has become, dare I say, rather plastic, flexible?
So I start where I began in thanking you for bringing this conversation to bear. I have been thoroughly furnished by my fellow panelists, and I can truthfully say I've said all I need to say about truth. It has been placed on trial. From the moment that we heard come out of the mouth of Kellyanne, this idea of fake news, we knew we were in for a ride. And what we found is that not only has this idea of critical race theory been deployed as a weapon to be used for, the political gains that it can bring, but we also have the wool has been now sort of pulled out from under us to some degree. There was a song a while back that said, "Who let the dogs out?" There used to be a lot of dog whistling going on, but now the dogs are completely out, and no one is concerned about whether or not the dogs are whistling. So truth is like that, right? Who let the truth out? Who gave us the ability to stand on truth? And I just have to say that, my faith informs my understanding of truth. And so when you want to deal with truth, you have to deal with a spirit that helps guide you.
Yes.
People have to get in touch with the Spirit of God to guide them to all truth, because otherwise deceit will do what it does best. And deceit operates most effectively when it shows itself as an angel of light.
Yes.
So when you've got a whole lot of Southern Baptists and a whole lot of fundamentalists and a whole lot of evangelicals promoting lies, they fall within the category of false prophets. And until we are able to call it like it is, to call it by its name, a lie, we'll fall for it. But if we can get in touch with a spirit that leads us to all truth, we won't have any question about what it is we need to believe, how it is we need to vote, who it is we need to read, what it is we need to teach our children.
Yes.
And we're in a moment, yes, democracy is being put on trial as well.
Yes.
A great deal of what we're seeing is the failure of democracy. And there are folk who have sold out to a different capacity altogether. It might be plutocracies. It could be aristocratic notions. It could be the gentile coming back. It might even be a puritanical concept, but none of them work like democracy should. And if you want to save this democracy, then you need to get in touch with what Attorney Kapoor has said. She said, you know, they didn't believe that we, the people, or any of those egalitarian things that they said. I do want to put one caveat. They did believe that all men were created equal.
Yes.
And men only. And I will say this as a last statement. Just like Mary Daly said, when God is man, man is God.
Wow. What a way to end that statement. Thank you so much for that. There's so many more questions. A question was put in the chat about what do we teach our children at home as parents? I think we've sort of touched on that. Some of the content. We need to teach them the true history. We need to be honest with them about what really took place over the course of this, the 200 plus years of this nation. Attorney Kapoor also lifted up the notion of we need to make sure that we recognize that some of the things we said we believed, we've never believed. Just as Dr. Smallwood just said, that notion of that all men are created equal. That statement, and likely it could have been written, all white men are created equal. And frankly speaking, if we knew anything about American history, we realize that all white men weren't created equal, because some white men were created lesser, but were told that they were white in order to give them the political benefit of the few white men that really were, quote unquote, created equal, their additional support and benefits in society. Thank you so much for that. One other question that was raised in the chat, I just want to at least acknowledge it. Let's see. The need to get Black ministers and white ministers, Black ministers in the Black church and white evangelical ministers, to begin a dialogue so that they can begin to see what a true history in America might look like. I think that's significant. For those of you who are out there watching tonight and you're looking at the books in the book list, I want you in the chat, I want you to know that we're going to post all of these books on Facebook after this talk is over. So you'll be able to go there and get an opportunity to see all of those texts, and you'll be able to take a look at that. Some of the questions that you have will be answered as you begin to look at some of these resources that might help you flesh out your libraries. And think about what you're teaching your children. Pastors, think about what you're teaching your congregations. All of us, think about the way it is that we understand our collective history and what it is that we need to do as a result of the sins of our past in order to have the kind of future that we say that we believe we want. Thank you all tonight. Dr. Smallwood, thank you so much, not just for your contribution tonight, but for your article in our next Just Act newsletter. You're going to see an article by Dr. Teresa Smallwood that will be incredibly helpful to you as you wrestle with this issue, with these issues as well of critical race theory. I want to say thank you to Attorney Gita Kapoor. I want to say personally thank you, because you got me out of jail when I was arrested with the Moral Monday movement back on May 6, 2013. And I'm so grateful to you for that. Grateful to you for your wonderful new book on UNC Chapel Hill. Teresa graduated from there. You graduated from there. My daughter is now a student from there. And we've lifted up the names of several other people that came through that institution today. Thank you so much for your work on that. If there's one thing I'd like to say at the end of this, is that this notion of the critique of critical race theory is not a innocent conversation. It is a painful and hurtful conversation when you diminish something like critical race theory that's meant to be a true examination of what's going on in the laws of our nation that perpetuated racial injustice. It hurts people when you deny them the validity of their history. It hurts when you say that this is what's wrong and you don't critique the horrid crimes that have taken place in our nation. It is fundamentally painful and a perpetual abuse when you utilize an idea that is used to teach law students and say that this is something that's harming our children. No, critical race theory is helping us as a society. And not only is it helping our larger society, the true racial history, which is what we would love to have taught to everyone, the true American history, which is what we need to, everyone should hear, is that which we need to be standing behind. This is a horrible and painful discourse that has been engaged by those seeking to gain political advantage at someone else's expense. Again, the expense of Black and brown people. May we be more thoughtful as we go forward in the way that we employ critical race theory, and the way that we think about what our children need to know about race and history. May we be more thoughtful about how we stand for truth in our nation. I'm grateful to you all for joining us tonight, and I ask that you come back and join us again. Dr. Smallwood lifted up the notion of the displacement of people in communities. Our next Dangerous Dialogue will be an opportunity to deal with Reverend Greg Gerald here in Charlotte, North Carolina, as he wrestles with the issue of the role of the white church in gentrification in the city of Charlotte, a truth that's taken place across this country as well. How do we begin as communities of faith to help support and develop wealth in communities and not work against that wealth for other political ideologies and reasons? Grateful to you for being here tonight, and I want to turn it back over to The Voice. Mike, please take it home. God bless you all.
Thank you, Dr. Sadler, and thank you all for watching. The conversation does not end here. Register for our upcoming travel seminar on contemporary efforts to promote civil rights and social justice. In February, we'll ride a charter bus from Charlotte, North Carolina to our nation's capital, making stops in Greensboro to explore the International Civil Rights Center and Museum, and at the Richmond campus of Union Presbyterian Seminary to examine the biblical and theological intersections of race and justice. For details, contact Aaron Mills at emills@upsem.edu. For now, enjoy the rest of your day.